Good afternoon. Welcome to the UNU-IIGH monthly webinar series, Working Local, Thinking Global, Engaging Evidence in Policymaking Towards the SDGs. The United Nations University International Institute for Global Health, in partnership with UN agencies in Malaysia, is proud to convene this webinar series. Now on its third year, the series provides a forum for intellectual discussion about the work of the UN towards the achievement of SDGs and brings together various voices from academics, researchers, and civil societies across Malaysia to meet and engage with their relevant counterparts in the UN system. So just some housekeeping rules. Next slide, please. So please tell us in the chat your name and where you are from. And if you have any questions during the presentation or after, please write your questions in the Q&A box and share also your thoughts and comments and express yourself in emojis, and please participate and enjoy. In this episode, Jodalyn Mitra, who is representing the International Labour Organization, join us to talk about ILO work in Malaysia related to engaging evidence in policy making towards the SDGs. Next slide, please. So Jodalyn Mitra is currently the technical officer for the International Labour Organization, managing the Malaysian component of the project, advancing workers' rights in the palm oil sector in Indonesia and Malaysia. Since joining LOO in 2010, she has worked on child labor, forced labor, human trafficking, and labor migration issues in the Philippines, Myanmar, and Malaysia. She is also involved in coordinating the ILO work in Malaysia. She is currently in Turin, Italy, and in the process of completing her Master's of Laws in International Trade Law with the Turin School of Development. Welcome, Jody.
Hey, thank you very much, Claudia.
The floor is
Good
yours.
afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon to everyone in Malaysia, and good morning from Italy. So thank you very much to UNU for inviting me to speak in this Working Local, Thinking Global seminar, Engaging Evidence and Policy Making Towards the SDGs. I'm very pleased to be here, and I also would like to hear if you have like comments or questions later to interact with you after my presentation. So I prepared my presentation, of course, referring to the given theme, but I'll begin with a background about the ILO, in particular about our mandates, membership structure, and technical support that we provide in policy making. Then I'll also make a connection between our work and the SDGs, particularly SDG 8. Then from this general knowledge, we will learn more about the Malaysia-specific information in terms of ratification of the ILO conventions and protocol and our work in the country. We'll close with some examples of resources that have been produced by the ILO at the global, regional, and national level that may be useful for you for evidence-based work on policymaking. So here in this slide, you will see a very brief background about our organization. It's an old organization established in 1919 as part of the Treaty of Versailles that ended the World War I. And during the purpose was to reflect the belief that universal and lasting peace can only be accomplished if it is based on social justice. So UN was not established back then, but ILO was part of the League of Nations. We joined UN in 1946 and became a specialized agency under it. Now ILO has 187 member states. So what's unique about our organization is its tripartite structure composed of representatives from the government, workers, and employers. And what this basically means is that the international labor standards, you're familiar with ILO conventions, protocols, recommendations. These are created and supervised through this tripartite structure. This approach to adopting, the standards ensures that they have broad support from the ILO constituents. And so, when at the national level, the implementation is also done in a tripartite manner in that sense, and the adoption at the national level. So the ILO key principles include, well, first, that labor is not a commodity, and that human beings, irrespective of race, creed, or sex, have the right to pursue both a material well-being and spiritual development and conditions of freedom and dignity, of economic security and equal opportunity. And the work that we do are aimed to promote rights at work that are contained in the labor standards, and then encourage decent employment opportunities, enhance social protection, and strengthen dialogue on work-related issues. So in the next slide, these are, I'm sure that all of you would be very familiar with this SDGs. ILO work cuts across these different SDGs. So just to give you an example, and SDG number one, to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. ILO's work on poverty reduction programs, social protection, microfinance, climate resiliency are very relevant. ILO also works on increasing productivity and incomes in agriculture for small scale producers, which is targeted under SDG 2 on ending hunger and food security and nutrition. So on SDG 3 on health, ILO also has programs on OSH, occupational safety and health, and also universal health coverage on AIDS as well. And SDG 4 on education, the ILO has extensive work on youth employment, skills, and other education related interventions, including related to child labor. Then gender equality and girls and women empowerment are mainstreamed in our ILO work, and which are the subject also of SDG 5. We also work in other sectors, and themes that are covered by the other SDGs. I will not go through each of this because this will be a longer discussion. But of course, if you need more information on this, I can of course share with you the links for more references. In the next slide, so this here we focused on SDG 8 because in particular, this SDG 8 on decent work is a key mandate of the ILO. And the work that we are doing on, for example, labor market information systems, improving productivity, developing a rural economy, informal economy as well, employment rich economic growth, enterprise development, promoting or improving national employment policies, even the work related to green jobs, gender equality, non-discrimination, forced labor, child labor, freedom of association, collective bargaining, health and safety at the workplace, labor migration, the promotion of ratification of the labor standards, and social protection, even future of work, and many more are these are within our a scope within the ILO, and all of this contribute to realizing this SDG 8 on decent work. So if we go to the next slide, as a standard setting organization, ILO has conventions, protocols, and recommendations. So the difference of this is that conventions and protocols are binding, while recommendations are not. So when a country ratifies an ILO convention and protocol, then they're bound, to adopt and implement it, or basically the adoption to domesticate it into national legislations. And also they have to report to ILO what efforts have been done to apply these conventions and protocols. And for researchers, I did a screenshot here of the ILO Normlex page. This is actually a good reference for you if you want to see what Malaysia has ratified or not, and comments as well of the committee of experts on the applications of conventions and recommendations for the country in terms of the application of the ratified conventions. So here you will see that Malaysia has ratified several fundamental conventions on forced labor, child labor, and freedom of association. So there's also some that are still pending, and then there's the governance conventions as well, and then the technical convention. So I don't think that we have time to go through each of this. But then the most important thing also to understand is that these fundamental conventions, whether the country has ratified this or not, there's this agreement that because they are fundamental, the member states of the ILO should actually adhere to these conventions. This are on forced labor, child labor, discrimination, freedom of association, and rights to collective bargaining. And then there are more technical conventions that are basically on very specialized topics, including, for example, on social protection, and like the wages and working hours, so forth. So yeah, they if you're interested to know more about this, you can check out that Normlex website. But also there's ILO publication called Rules of the Game: An Introduction to the Standards Related Work of the International Labor Organization. It provides us summaries of a large number of conventions broken down by subject area. So if you Google it, you will find easily a copy online. The title of the publication again is Rules of the Game: An Introduction to the Standards Related Work of the International Labor Organization. Now, within the ILO structure that's shown here in slide 7, you will see that that there's the International Labor Office, which is different from the International Labor Organization, which is the bigger organization. So the International Labor Office is where our project office in Malaysia is a part of. It is the permanent secretariat of the International Labor Organization, which is tripartite in nature. Government workers and employers. So as the International Labor Office, we serve as the focal point for ILO's overall activities. Basically, we work in different countries. Right now, we're over 900 staff working in development cooperation programs and in projects. We're present in over 40 field offices around the world, and we provide technical support in terms of how member states of the ILO could, let's say, towards certification and application of the ILO standards. And also within the International Labor Office, we also have the Research and Documentation Center, where you will find materials that might be helpful for you if you are interested in the topic of labor and employment. In the next slide, yeah, this is pertaining to our work in Malaysia, which is very much anchored in the Decent Work Country program, which the Ministry of Human Resources, Malaysian Trades Union Congress, and Malaysian Employers Federation and the ILO signed back in 2019. So it has basically three key pillars: the rights at work, future of work, and labor migration. And under rights at work, we deal with labor law reform and industrial relations, forced labor and child labor, and responsible supply chains and social protection, and other regional and HQ initiatives as well. Then under the future of work, we have also skills development, SME developments, the regional and HQ initiatives as well. And under labor migration, we have projects like migrant workers empowerment and advocacy. We have also for the supporting women migrant workers, as well as fair recruitment initiatives, those that are within the region, ASEAN Triangle, for instance. So personally, my work actually touches on forced labor, child labor, human trafficking, and labor migration and responsible supply chain. So I'd like to clarify that the ILO projects work in the country not solely on research. So these are development cooperation projects designed with components on awareness raising, capacity building, technical support for policy development, and research as one of the components. And so here, my next few slides, I just would like to quickly show you some examples of the resources that are available, publicly available and useful for academicians and other organizations that are doing research. Well, of course, in reality, there are more, if you check the ILO website. But here I focus on those materials on social protection, forced labor, child labor, labor migration, and other thematic areas. And in terms of the social protection earlier, can you go back, please? You will see here that these are there's the regional report here extending social health protection in Asia and the Pacific. Then we have also the global reports, the World's Social Protection Report, extension of Social Security, and there's like the annual reports that you can also subscribe to. Then in terms of forced labor, next slide. So in forced labor, I just here for researchers, what would be useful material will be to look at this, guidelines concerning the measurement of forced labor, which was published and as part of the International Conference of Labor Statistician. So this is 2018. This has the definitions also related to forced labor and the different indicators there. And this is we have here also the global estimates of modern slavery. That was a publication together with Walk Free and also IOM. Then this important research on profits and poverty, the economics of forced labor, and which looks at the impact, how big uh, profit is generated from the exploitation of workers in forced labor. And for Malaysia, this one is qualitative research, which we did to support, the preparation for the ratification of the ILO Forced Labor Protocol. It's a situation and gap analysis of Malaysian legislation, policies, and programs in the ILO Forced Labor Protocol, Convention and Protocol. And on child labor, we also have the manual for child labor data analysis and statistical reports, which provide guidelines for researchers as to how to measure child labor. And there's also the manual on child labor rapid assessment methodology done by the statistical arm of the ILO on the focus on child labor before. And this is one publication, joint publication by ILO and UNICEF on the child labor global estimates. So moving on labor migration, since ILO's work in Malaysia is much longer in terms of labor migration, there's more research actually that's available on in this. For instance, we have done migration cost survey among Indonesians and Filipino domestic workers in Malaysia. The same migration cost survey, the same methodology using Nomad, which was developed with World Bank. It was used also for Indonesian plantation workers in Malaysia. Then there's the public attitudes towards migrant workers in Malaysia survey as well. And there's the research, qualitative research on enhancing standard employment contracts for migrant workers in the plantations and domestic work. And in Southeast Asia, the study about access to justice for migrant workers, making use of the data from the migrant resource centers that ILO also supports in Malaysia. And the other, resources on various topics. We have, for instance, the report about on the review that one of our projects did, focusing on the labor dispute resolution system. So if you're doing research for example, the labor courts, industrial courts. This might be interesting for you. And also, we have studies on occupational safety and health. There's the green jobs mapping study in Malaysia, and this one on assessment of women entrepreneurs needs, and the supports that are available, which was also done by another project based in Malaysia. Um, if so, for the next slide, I think, yeah. And these are important, this International Labor Conference on Labor Statisticians, this very authoritative body, which meets on a on a periodic basis. And on them every conference there are resolutions that are basically passed. So the recent one in 2018, they adopted 4 resolutions concerning statistics on work relationships, child labor, and methodology on SDG indicators on labor rights and youth employment. You can find this in the ILO website, and then find more guidance on this. The 19th ICLS focused more on the employment and labor underutilization, work on forced labor, cooperatives, and labor migration, and the functioning of the ICLS, basically. The 18th were more also on working time, child labor, and labor underutilization and indecent work. And I just would like to, I think that's the last slide, but to see, just to say that also there's ongoing work now such as by the supply chain project of the ILO. It's a deep dive research with the Nottingham, Malaysia University. It's an ongoing work, but of course, from time to time, there's this partnerships that's being done also with the academic community in Malaysia. We to see a broader range of support, particularly on research, you can check out the ILO stat.ilo.org. So ILO stat.ilo.org. You will find there available trainings, including training courses and workshops such as on SDG monitoring. The flagship training course is the annual Labor Market Statistics and Analysis Academy. And also there are various, tools and guidelines. For instance, there's the ILO manual on decent work indicators, guidelines for producers and users of statistical and legal framework indicators. Then there's also guidelines on designing sampling frame for labor force surveys if you're trying to implement, the latest standards. There's a ILO model labor force survey, for example, for in the LFS resources page. Then for analysis purposes, there's the guidebook on SDG labor market indicators. There's a quick guide on interpreting the unemployment rate, visualizing the labor market, a quick guide to charting labor statistics, and key labor market indicators analysis with household survey data. So well, those are, I'm not like an expert in statistics per se. Again, like what I told you, I'm my focus is on forced labor, child labor, labor migration, human trafficking. But I'm happy to answer questions. I understand that most of the participants are from the academic community as well, and interested in accessing resources. Also, you have my email address and the last slide. You have my email address, so feel free to reach out to me if you have like very specific areas of work. From what I've mentioned earlier, we have a broad range of thematic areas under our portfolio. Even if we don't implement here in Malaysia just yet on the topic, we have experts based in Geneva or in Bangkok that I can liaise your questions later. But also today I can answer your question. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jody, for this really comprehensive presentation about the ILO work and particularly this wealth of information and resources that you offer us. First of all, we have a comment from one of our participants in this webinar, C.K. Tan. So he wrote that some of the Malaysian corporations have been accused of forced labor and their products export to the US was under investigation. Since some of these corporations won some awards, he has one question. So can you please elaborate more why such excellent corporations in terms, even in terms of the being good players in terms of environment and social contribution, they were facing this sanction issue, and what are the moves that a company can take in order to comply with international standards of forced labor? Thank you.
Thank you very much, CK, for this question. So I think I'll just answer this more generally, because well, in terms of compliance to standards by private companies, there's ILO has actually a lot of tools and also capacity building trainings that we provide that are available for companies. Um, and what we highlight in this trainings, for instance, or the guidance, is that the importance of understanding the risks, assessing what are the risks in your businesses that could be later associated to forced labor. So you can look at, for instance, the recruitment practices, the actual employment practices. There's due diligence measures that could be implemented there when you're dealing with third party recruiters, for instance, making sure that they have all the necessary permits from the government. They're also compliant with the let's say sending countries legislation, the labor legislation there. They don't have any past records of being implicated in forced labor or trafficking, or illegal recruitment, for instance. And also, what are like, do they provide information to migrant workers about their rights and how they can access legal remedies? Some examples also of the good employment practices is that there's no passport retention, for instance. The workers keep their passport on their own. And then there's the good housing and accommodation that's being provided to them. They have a freedom of movement, and also the freedom to change employment within the what's allowed by the national law. And basically the compliance to the national laws. The in terms of the gap, as to why maybe some of the companies that may have good records of ESG are still, what did Siki mention, accused of forced labor in their products export to US. I cannot comment specifically on this, because we know there's the US is a different, they have their own methodology of assessing this. But I think it would be good to review, of course, the company practices, and see if there are rooms to improve there, looking at the various business practices in that sense, and seeing how you can also involve workers in the process, consulting them if there's some processes that needs to be tweaked, to be to address some of their issues. So there's also better industrial relations, and providing as well an internal complaints mechanism that protects, for example, whistleblowers, and help address issues, and before it's like a forced labor issue in that sense. So even let's say compliant a non-compliance on minimum wage, or let's say, overtime fees. So very single issues that are violation of labor laws. It would be good to already address this, little things, because if you don't address it at the beginning, then it could actually go become worse at sometimes, and then it becomes a forced labor indicator.
Thanks, Jody. We have a couple of questions more. So we have a question from Su Chen Kwan. So extreme temperature from climate change is affecting the health and well-being, especially of the outdoor labor force. It is reducing industrial productivity, importantly, the crops and food production. Does this fall under the ILO work? And if yes, is there any project that is ongoing or has been done about this? Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you,
Chuchi.
Su. Yeah, thank you, Claudia. And Suchin, indeed, this is part of the ILO work. I've mentioned that, we have also ongoing work at them, not at the country level yet, but at the regional and also HQ level. We have the green jobs project, so climate resiliency, improving productivity given the challenges of climate change, for instance. And well, in the future, maybe we will have in Malaysia also, like focused project on this. But for now, support could also already be accessed through our regional office and Geneva headquarters on this. So for instance, that mapping that I showed you earlier, mapping on related to green jobs, that was done specifically for Malaysia. So that one is already like to assess the issues around what you've highlighted here. And yeah, so if there are like specific resources that you want later to access, you can also email me, and I'll link you up to our specialist on this.
Excellent, Jody. So there's other question here from Sandra Lucia Rodriguez. Good morning. Excellent presentation. My question is about the limitations of the project and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Sandra, there are limitations definitely in our project and implementation, because we're a development cooperation projects. We're time bound basically, and that's why some of the scope of the projects are much smaller in terms of, you know um given the available resources. As much as possible, for instance, would like to have like there are a lot of research topics that would like to delve in, and um to develop more robust programming around this, but then there's the limitation of resources that's available, and the time frame issues. So those are the two things. And also there are but I wouldn't focus on that some more, because then we will see also that within the given limited time, what ILO usually does, being, having our mandate of, building the capacity of the institutional partners, and this helps sustain our work beyond the project life cycle. For instance, the work on forced labor, which I've been doing, it's, helping the government develop national action plan on forced labor. We work closely with the Ministry of Human Resources, and the other relevant organizations on that. And so the government, having prioritizing forced labor and having that national action plan, having concrete actions there that they will implement, take the leadership role in implementing, is the sustainability factor. So we focused in our efforts on creating that kind of, policy level, and long-term solutions, that with the hope that the stakeholders will also carry out much long-term implementation. Yeah.
Good. So There were questions coming even from different platforms, LinkedIn. So if you can still use LinkedIn to post your questions to Jody. So there's one here from Richard Kibuka. Thanks for the presentation. And he has to elaborate on the methodology used to define decent work for all in the field. And what do you call productive employment in the operational context of your research? So I think maybe this is related with SDGH indicators, how it can translate in the field, how do you measure it?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And then, unfortunately, I'm not the the statistical expert that could provide Richard with a good answer for this. But maybe what I can do is that to share this slide, we can share the slides that I gave earlier, Claudia. No, they will have access to that, and you will see there the list of the resources that I shared. And if you can access the materials, there's the elaboration of the methodology to define decent work, as well as the question here of Richard on productive employment in the operational context. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, so we will share the resources, and also this recording will be available on YouTube. So we have a question for Rajekwari Malik. Is there any steps taken to spread awareness among youth? And the current dealing of I guess the SDGs miss this in most of the countries. Best wishes for the good work you are doing.
Thank you, Rajis. Yes, we in Malaysia, we also have awareness raising among the youth in partnership with youth organizations such as Project Liberate, for instance. And Project Liberate, they partner with schools they do this advocacy on the road, advocate on the road. There's the campaign, together with different ILO projects, and even I understand other UN agencies as well. So tackling issues such as forced labor, human trafficking, labor migration. Of course, there's more opportunities there to have to expand this awareness raising among the youth on not just this topics of forced labor, human trafficking, and labor migration, but in general what concerns them. um, in some engagement, we've also had dialogues with the youth. They're concerned about the skills that they need for the future of work, for instance. They their the participation, their rights, when they're already in the workforce. So this are opportunities to engage with the academic community in that sense, and also youth organizations, even other CSOs. The limitations, I think, can we, there was another question there. The current dealing of SDGs miss this, and yes, that's true. Yeah, so there's some. I think it's still the engagement can be furthered, into seeing that there are other grassroots organizations that actually can be mobilized. So not just school-based activities, for instance. There are many youth at the community level that needs to be reach, or organizations, community leaders can actually also be partnered with in terms of spreading awareness to them.
Thank you, Jody. I don't think we have any more questions from our social media or from Zoom. Maybe have just a quick question to you. Maybe please continue posting the questions. We still have some time. So it's a question related with the gender dimensions of child labor or forced labor, or even the access to justice. So do you have very good examples from your work, how can ILO is integrating gender in the policies, the way that analyzes the policies and the ways that implement the programs? Thank you.
Yes, indeed. So we've seen that, for instance, the the sectors where girls and boys are engaged in child labor, could vary. The prevalence could vary. Although we don't have like national prevalence survey in Malaysia, but globally, for instance, we see that in domestic work, it's the girls that are usually in child labor, and also they have the greater burden of household chores, when that affects as well the education, when the parents go to work, for instance, they're the ones taking care of their siblings at home, making them miss schools. But then in sectors like construction, plantation, those that require physical, the heavy work, then the boys are the most engaged in, and that affects as well their health, and like stunted growth, injuries, cause a lot of injuries. In terms of forced labor, it's the same thing actually, like human trafficking. If you see in the news, domestic work, are women, migrant workers that are mostly affected, well, construction men, and the interventions are also need to be gender specific in a way, understanding the different needs, the proper approaches of dealing with them. For instance, if you're access to justice, there's that the importance of having, for example, women enforcement, more women in the enforcement agencies, handling cases, and also dealing with, helping assist the victims through the NGOs that have trainings on gender responsive interventions, as well as making sure that those that are providing them support services from the government, the authorities, understand this different dynamics on gender. If you're dealing with cases on that involve sexual violence, for instance, that's very traumatizing, and you can't just harry the case. There's psychosocial support that's needed to be given. So there's it's various, definitely, gender dynamics there that have to be taken into consideration, from, well, even the awareness, giving them proper awareness, but at the same time the actual support services that's provided to the victims.
Thank you very much. I would love to hear more about it. And maybe when you visit us in the office in Kuala Lumpur.
Yeah.
But we still have one question before we close from LinkedIn. So, is there any specific mechanism for combating forced labor or child labor trafficking in Malaysia?
Thank you. I think this one specific mechanism, well, it's not like just one very specific way of addressing this. I think the important thing to consider is that forced labor and child labor, these are complex issues, and there's a lot of root causes that have to be addressed. So, for instance, preventing them will need to look into, like, who are the most affected, and what are their needs, why are they prone to forced labor and child labor or trafficking. um Even these three issues, they have to be segmented differently, right? So, for instance, with forced labor in Malaysia, we see this most closely associated with migrant workers. So the addressing, combating forced labor among migrant workers would need to look into the vulnerabilities of migrant workers. For example, what's the recruitment practices now? How is recruitment regulated, and do they have the awareness? Providing them with proper awareness about their rights, but at the same time giving them proper access to justice if there's violation to the rights. And in terms of when they're in employment already, what laws in Malaysia actually protect them, make sure that that they're able to report any kind of violation. There's multiple ways, multiple entities that could help address this. So I would say that it's a multi-party mechanism that we need to look at here. There's the companies themselves that hire the workers, and then the government, from the regulatory function of the government, the enforcement function there, and then the even those that are in the supply chain, those buying the products, they could also have a role to play. The communities, in terms of also having ways of uh, giving information to the public, helping report cases of forced labor in child labor. So in child labor, again, it's a broad topic, and it's good to analyze it, like look at the connection, for example, of child labor with education. In Malaysia, child labor, it's usually associated with those that are non-Malaysians and have limited access to the education. So that kind of importance of them having access to education, so that they're not falling into child labor, and also making sure that even the family, the adults working for this families of child laborers, they're paid well, because the if the context is that, if let's say, if in a family, a big family, and with very little income, household income, they would sometimes bring their children to work with them, and that's for additional income. So it's also looking at the working conditions of adults, and at the same time, having social protection for the vulnerable population, and at the same time, making sure that this is this mechanism of combating forced labor and child labor span all target groups, Malaysians, non-Malaysians, documented and undocumented.
Thanks, Jody. So the questions keep coming. It's a sign that we have a very engaged audience. So I have like two short ones for you, and that will be the last ones. So the first one is, does the concept of decent work cover minimum wage and gender parity in wages?
Yes, that's my short answer. Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Thank you. And there's also a question about the ILO work in terms of raising awareness of the labor rights, since in certain countries, labor rights, people don't have awareness about their rights in terms of the decent labor.
Yes.
So can you just give a glimpse of ILO work in terms of informing and raising awareness? Thank you.
Yeah. So here in, I keep saying here in Malaysia. I feel like I'm in Malaysia now. But yeah, in Malaysia, through the projects that are implemented there, the on like labor migration, forced labor, child labor, the supply chain projects. And we have awareness raising programs, like we produce videos that are actually available online, also through the various platforms, videos. Then there's the brochures that have been distributed to our network, and there's the partnership with a youth organization I mentioned earlier, and also through the partners, like the employers organization, the trade unions, the civil society organizations that we engage in, the government agencies. So these are the kinds of awareness activities that we've been implementing. But of course, there's more to do. We see that there's still a lot of information that would need to be, maybe now with the emerging trends also, on how we could disseminate information and package information in a way that's easier to understand. Then we could develop further on this, and given, of course, that's this increased partnership as well in Malaysia.
Okay, thank you very much, Jovi. So these are the questions that we had for you today. So thanks a lot for our audience for sending these very important questions and also for this rich discussion. So if you'd like to follow up with Jodeline, please, follow her in her social media and or send an email to IGH, and we can also put you in touch with her. So I would like to thank also to our team, our comms team, and to Nadia to organizing the webinar, to Nadia and to Radhika. And finally, join us for the next webinar. And next slide. So the next webinar will be on the 16th of June. And please follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, to have more information about it. Yes, so thank you for your participation, and please use this QR code to give us some feedback so we can improve the webinar series in the future. Thank you very much.